Well, another pressing issue in the PM's in-tray is the upcoming COP26 climate summit. And today there was good news from China, which announced that it will no longer be involved in new coal power projects overseas. Well, our chief correspondent Alex Thompson is in the newsroom with the latest for us. Alex, is it as good as it sounds?
Well, it takes us quite a long way there. As the Prime Minister said, inflection moments. This really could be one. Remember all those people who always say, well, it doesn't matter what we do about climate in the UK because the Americans and the Chinese aren't doing it and they're the big polluters. Well, that's all changed. And it's changed today in two ways. We're not talking about targets anymore. We're talking about doing. We're talking about action. And the Chinese have said, as you say, they're not going to fund any more coal-fired power stations. They spent $40 billion on this since 2000. Now, they've tapered off recently, and they're following, it's true, in the wake of both Japan and Korea in doing this. But in pulling out, it sends a huge shockwave through the entire financial edifice for people who would want to finance future coal power stations. A huge win on the road to COP. Second, the money. Both the Chinese and the US today said they will stump up and pay their bit towards the $100 billion pledged as part of COP to help emerging economies deal with decarbonisation. A huge step. G20 will follow. The British say they're already going to do it. It looks like now the $100 billion is within sight. It looked like a pipe dream just a few days ago.
And this is just the latest big move this week, isn't it, Alex?
Yes, it is. If we want to do two things to cut humanity's carbon, you shut coal-fired power stations. The other thing is you cut methane, largely from agriculture and industry. Way more damaging in the short term than carbon dioxide, of course. Now, today, it came out really over the weekend, and it was sealed formally a couple of days ago. But it's really in the last few days that both the US and the EU have sealed an agreement. It's only, again, a target, but it is a hugely significant one. They're pledging to cut their methane output 30% by a third by 2030. Again, the rollout, that will likely be taken up by G20 and countries beyond. Who knows, Xi Jinping and the Chinese as well. So that another huge move today on the road to COP. Things are happening.
And also a new attempt by the World Health Organization to get countries to drive down air pollution.
Yes, this has no effect in law, but it's very much to encourage people. And again, dramatic stuff. They want to cut nitrous oxide, which of course largely comes from diesel vehicle exhaust, by 75% in our cities globally, don't forget. And they also want to cut by 50% the particulates which are so damaging from burning fossil fuels. And it is damaging. It's reckoned to kill more than 7 million people a year. Those are the kind of figures we're talking about here. It's easy to forget those kind of numbers. Now, of course, as I say, it is a wish. It has no stipulation in law, but that will be fed into planning by every major urban, or by many major urban authorities. And of course, the whole COP process will give that an enormous push. Things, as I say, are beginning to happen beyond just targeting.
Alex Thompson, thanks very much. Well, joining me now is the Green Party MP, Caroline Lucas. Caroline Lucas, welcome to the programme. How significant is this move by China?
Well, I think it is significant. It was long predicted. They've been moving away from making these big financial commitments overseas to coal. So they'd already been moving in that direction. But certainly it's very welcome that they have now properly ruled that out. Of course, it raises still more questions about their own domestic use of coal. Let's not forget that China is responsible for over 50% of coal generation when you look at it globally. So they've still got a way to go when it comes to cutting coal use at home. But certainly this is a good sign ahead of COP, and I think is a step in the right direction.
It is in some ways an economic decision. The cost of renewables has fallen. Doesn't it show that countries will only act when the economics make sense?
Well, I think you're right that the economics increasingly do make sense. And of course, if more countries were to move in this direction more quickly, the prices come down more quickly. So I think in a sense, we can't simply just wait until the economics works out. The two things are related. One of the reasons the cost of renewables is coming down is precisely because so many countries are adopting them. That's why we need really tough targets. And that's why we need, frankly, Boris Johnson as the host of the COP to be really demonstrating in his own actions that he's being meaningful when he talks about this key moment in history, this inflection point and so forth, because there is a vast gulf between what he's saying and what he's doing. Britain itself is talking about a new coal mine in Cumbria. Britain is talking about a new oil field off Shetland, the Cambo oil field. We are foreseeing a £27 billion road building programme, airport expansion. We are way off our own climate targets. And to be honest, diplomacy really depends on walking your talk. And that's what I think Boris Johnson hasn't been doing. And I think there are going to be quite a few raised eyebrows around the world tonight as they hear Boris Johnson making those big rhetorical sweeps in his statement, because what really matters is what you do, not what you say. And unfortunately, Britain hasn't been doing the right thing.
Well, on that note, there are still huge challenges to meet for Britain to meet net zero targets and beyond. That's going to take huge societal change. What do you think that change is? And do you think people are ready to make those changes?
Well, to take your second point first, I absolutely think people are ready to make these changes. You know, we've had many citizens' assemblies now, citizens' assemblies on climate. One was organised by Parliament itself. And when you give a genuinely cross-section of society the objective evidence about the climate crisis, the nature crisis, and ask them what kind of policies they'd like to see, the ambition that they come up with is far ahead of anything that we see from governments. So, for example, they'll come up with a frequent flyer levy to try to reduce the demand for aviation. They'll come up with free bus travel, for example, to make it much easier for people to take public transport. So there's definitely an appetite there. And what it's going to take, frankly, is it is going to be a massive change, not least in the way that we measure economic success. Because right now, while all of the economies in the world are chasing more and more GDP growth, gross domestic product, as the be-all and end-all of the purpose of their economies, then we are constantly having more and more production and consumption on a planet of finite resources. If we followed the example of a country like New Zealand and had a well-being budget where we put health and well-being of people and planet ahead of GDP growth, we would have a chance of getting on the right track when it comes to the huge investment we need to see in home insulation, for example. That would get people's bills down, it would get climate emissions down, it would get
Caroline
jobs
Lucas,
up.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt you, sorry. That point about insulation, I tell you what is divisive with the public is Insulate Britain, this group that has blocked the M25 5 times. They've had a court injunction issued against them today. Do you support the action that they've been taking, that direct protest?
I certainly support the principle of non-violent direct action. It's something that I've undertaken myself, and the Green Party is very clear about it.
Do you support them blocking the M25?
I think there are issues around the protests as we've got to them now, because what we're talking about is the tactics and not the actual issues that they want to raise. What I would like to see them doing as well would be to have the demonstrations outside Downing Street, outside the Treasury. I understand why they haven't, because in a sense that gets less traction. But what I want to be talking about is the actual substantive issues about the fact that Britain has failed to insulate homes properly, that we are having some of the most leaky homes in the country, that the Green Homes Grant was scrapped, the Green Deal was scrapped. The government simply hasn't put in place the most basic thing, home insulation, that would be positive for people, would create jobs as well.
Thank you. Caroline Lucas, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.